Good morning. I'm Gerard Lyons. I'm Chief Economic Advisor here at Policy Exchange. I have the pleasure of chairing this third session. And this third session is The Age of Leisure, was Keynes right about work and leisure? I'll introduce the expert panel as we go along, but we'll begin first and foremost with Duncan Weldon on the far side. He's Head of Research at the Resolution Group. However, you want to talk about the historical context and what Keynes was saying and whether he was right. But, Duncan first, and then we'll have the other three speakers follow.
Thank you so much. I'll try and be brief. And talking about the age of leisure, the morning after the Christmas party the night before, sort of appropriate. The hangover is cleared. Go back. The economic possibilities of our grandchildren. You know, it's amazing. It's about a 7-page essay. It's a short essay published in The Nation, and despite it being a short 7-page essay, there have been reams and reams of stuff written about it. It keeps published in 1930, and it keeps coming up again and again in the debate. When the economy is doing well and people are feeling really optimistic, they look towards this future of, you know, a 15-hour week, a time of leisure. And then at times when the economy is doing badly, they look towards this worry of what Keynes called technological unemployment. So it sort of comes and goes over the years. There are two central claims made in the essay, or two predictions. Firstly, it's worth saying it was published in 1930 during the Great Depression. And it opens with this line, you know, we're currently under a severe attack of economic pessimism. People wonder if the economic progress in the 19th century will ever be repeated. You know, so the kind of thing you see now is the work of Robert Gould, and talk of secular stagnation. You know, now we say, will the growth rates of the 20th century be repeated? Well, you know, just remind us that this is an old debate. But looking forward, Keynes is optimistic. He says he sees no reason why 100 years hence, by 2030, the economy won't be 4 to 8 times as large as it currently was in 1930. So, briefly checking the numbers this morning, GDP per capita was about £5,300 in 1930. It's about £28,000 now. We've still got 15 years to go. Even at a 1.5%, 2% growth rate, we're going to be something like 7 times as big. So what seemed like a very optimistic statement, actually we're towards the top end of that. The more controversial bit, though, of course, was Keynes saying, as productivity grew, as living standards rose 4 to 8 times, we would choose to work less. We'd choose to work a 15-hour week. He's not quite as wrong as you might imagine. I'll look briefly at the history of working hours. Before 1800, the UK working week was about 50 hours. This is full-time equivalent. Just talking full-time equivalents. About 50 hours. In the early 19th century, in the Industrial Revolution, it rose, peaking at almost 70 hours in the 1820s, 1830s. And since then, it's been falling. 1930, when Keynes wrote, the average full-time working week was about 48 hours. Today, it's about 37. I mean, we are nowhere near the 15, but the working week has fallen considerably. And in fact, if you look at average hours, including part-time, the working week's now about 30 hours, down from about 45 in 1930. The working week is about a third smaller than it was. But, and I'll just finish here, I mean, where he erred, and there are two things he erred on. He said we may experience something called technological unemployment, a new thing he described it as. He spoke about American factory productivity, how this would throw people out of work. I mean, I don't understand why he described that as a new thing. In the 100 years before 1930, the UK had lost 1 million jobs in agriculture. And they'd been replaced. This isn't a new thing. This is what modern economic growth looks like from the 1700s onwards. So I don't know why he called that a new thing. It's a perennial worry we're having again now. The second thing I'd say is, the assumption he got wrong was, and maybe this will change over time, generally the lesson of economic history is, as output per hour rises, people do take a bit of leisure time, but people generally aren't targeting some sort of, people generally don't have some sort of income target. They don't think, I want to earn £20,000 a year, now I can do that in 20 hours, I'll work 20 hours rather than 30. People keep working 30 hours and earn more. I mean, that's generally been the situation. And I think that's, you know, so I'll just finish by saying, absolutely right on the overall size of the economy, not as wrong as you might think on the contraction in the working week, although still too optimistic. But where I would say very wrong was to fret too much about this wave of technological unemployment.
Thank you. Duncan, thank you. Following straight on, and again looking at Keynes from a historical perspective, is Daniel Suskind, who's an economics fellow at Balliol College in Oxford. Over to you, Daniel.
Thanks a lot. So I'm going to overlap a little with what Duncan was saying. I want to try and pick out three of the things that Keynes got right, and then three of the things that he got, I think, wrong. So in this essay, he defines the economic problem as, says it's the struggle for subsistence. And the main claim of this essay, as we just heard, was that he's saying that this isn't the permanent problem of the human race, that at some point we're going to overcome this economic problem. And to an extent it's true. Another way of looking at this is if you take the $78 trillion world output and divide it by 7.2 billion, the world population, you get an income of about $10,800 per capita. And if you think the poverty threshold for a two-person family in the US is about 15,391, you can see that in some sense we have solved, the economic problem. So the general trajectory that he saw for the economy, I think, was right. I think he was also right just more generally about the idea that technological progress embodied in productivity growth makes our working lives easier. So if you think of the most productive country in Europe, it's Germany, and the country that works the fewest hours in Europe is Germany. Similarly, the least productive country in Europe is Greece, and the country that works the most hours in Europe is Greece. So there is again a kind of another angle. And I think he's also right in more pernicious ways. One of the things that's quite interesting, and it's something that Larry Summers, the US economist, is talking about a lot in the US at the moment, is the rise of unemployment among men of working age in the US. So we've got unemployment in the UK and the US below 5%, but men in America, the share of the male population who are neither working, looking for work, in school, or old enough to retire, has more than doubled in the last few decades, despite the fact that everyone is healthier and more educated than they are in the past. There are, although at an aggregate level, we don't see vast pools of displaced people, the sort you might imagine when you hear the term technological unemployment. There are, I think, more complicated stories when you look under those headline figures. But I think the first and the most important thing he was wrong on was this idea about leisure. As Duncan said, he anticipated 3-hour shifts, 15-hour working weeks, and it's a point it's made well by Joseph Stiglitz. He says, the puzzle suggested by Keynes's paper is not so much what people have done with their leisure, but why they've chosen to enjoy so little leisure. Why do people work as hard and as long as they do? Why have increased wages and wealth translated mostly into increased goods, not into increased leisure? Why do we have so much consumerism and not more leisure? And so there's a sense in which Keynes has almost kind of underestimated the marginal utility of labour and overestimated the marginal utility of leisure. From a kind of economic standpoint, that's I think one of the most important ideas. Although we do see elements of the leisure story in Germany and Greece, it's not as punchy as Keynes might have expected. He also was wrong on distribution. So we don't divide the pie up evenly. That story, many of you would have jumped when I said just divide 78 trillion by 7.2 billion. You get an income of $10,800. Of course, more than 1 billion people live on less than $1 a day, more than 2.7 billion people on less than $2 a day. The economic problem has really only been solved for a very privileged and lucky few, and largely it's not the case for everyone else. And it was also, one of the ironies, I think, of the essay is that he was wrong on the transition. Keynes always said, in the long run we're all dead, and sort of dismissed the long run as something that was relatively uninteresting. But that essay is an essay about the longest run. It's an essay on the economic possibilities for our grandchildren. And while it's entertaining, I think, to jump 100, 150 years ahead, some of the most troubling things about Keynes' story are the things that happen in those intervening 100 years, sort of things that we see in our labour market today. increased job security, real wages not rising for particular types of people, increasing polarised labour market, lots of growth in low-skilled jobs, lots of growth in high-skilled jobs, not a lot in the middle. Those are sort of the troubling features that occupy policymakers, but they're the thing that Keynes, going against his mantra, sort of swept to one side and ignored in leaping to the long run. Just let me finish on one final comment just about this idea of technological unemployment, which I mean, in his essay he calls it, he says, this means unemployment due to our discovery of means of economizing the use of labour, outrunning the pace at which we can find new uses for labour. And so I spent quite a lot of time now thinking about this idea of technological unemployment, and actually this definition is a bit of a fudge, I think, because I think there's two important conceptions of technological unemployment. One is the idea that technology displaces people and new jobs arise elsewhere, but they don't have the skills and capabilities necessary to move from job to job. They're still displaced by technology, but simply can't get the new jobs that are available because they don't have the skills and capabilities. So we might call that kind of frictional technological unemployment, due to friction, that the labour market doesn't clear perfectly, there's matching problems and so on. So that's one idea, and I think that's a relatively uncontroversial idea. I think everybody would look at that and say, that is a feature of some of the job markets that we see around us. But there's then, and I think this is the more challenging kind of conception of technological unemployment, which is that even if everybody could instantaneously, overnight, learn all the skills and capabilities they might need for any job in the world, there's still not enough demand out there for labour. They wouldn't be able to find a job. That to me seems like the kind of the hard, the tough idea of technological unemployment, and I think it's the one that's starting to come through in the writing that people are engaged in at the moment about the future of work and the future of technology, and that's the particular conception of the problem that I'm interested in. And I think Keynes's definition fudges it and allows for both of those possibilities to play out. So those are my reflections, I guess.
Thank you, Daniel. Obviously, we'll come back to these issues in the Q&A later. Torsten Bell follows. Whereas Duncan works for the Resolution Group, Torsten works for the Resolution Foundation. He is the guy who raises the money and you do all the work, as you understand.
As far as I can tell, Duncan has never knowingly made money, but he's meant to make money, and then I meant to spend money.
And this allows you
That is the social contract, and at the moment he's being broken, seriously. So they could up their game, I could then hire more people, public policy would improve, we'd solve all unemployment issues, and it would be done.
It's good.
So pull your finger out. Stop spending your time at events like this. Right, now, well, I think we've talked a lot about the essay, so I thought I'd just say a little bit about what's actually going on in the labour market, and then come back to Keynes at the end, because a lot of this, like, if someone had said to me 5 years ago, I've got to make a few £100,000, personally, all I can do is write, then what I should have said to them is, right, whatever you actually think, just go and write a book about the robots destroying jobs, and you will make a killing over the next 5 years. It turns out to have been one of the most lucrative things to have engaged in. And what I'm about to say is that would have been good advice from an economic, personal finance perspective, but I don't really think it would have been added much to the value of human thought. And here is basically why. Because it is obviously true that technology is a big giant driver of job destruction. So for example, if you worked in leather goods manufacturing in 1995, you would have had 200,000 colleagues in the UK. Today, there are about a quarter of that workforce left. Actually, a lot of it is the same workforce. If you look at the age distribution of people working in leather goods manufacturing, which is a posh word for shoes, they're around Northampton. Handbags. And some handbags, although Northampton makes less of those. But the prices have risen fast, so you can make a lot of money. Anyway, but so leather goods manufacturing, jobs have gone. For the people concerned, less actually in this particular industry, it doesn't look like we saw large unemployment, it's just that they stopped hiring new people. You had a grandfathering of the existing workforce and you stopped bringing in new people. But that's a big deal, and actually it looks like automation in a broader sense is a bigger deal in terms of driving those job changes than trade, which is obviously the top of the discussion post-Trump on jobs, just for jobs. So that part is true, jobs are going and it's having an effect. The hollowing out debate, which Daniel mentioned, which has been going around for a mixture of the last decade, particularly in the United States. So I'll start with what looks like is true about that debate. What looks like is true is that routineness of tasks is a good predictor of whether those jobs disappeared over the last 20 years. routines, which is the jobs which were in the middle of the occupational pay spectrum, office clerks, for example, those jobs with routineness scores tested in the 1990s, those are the jobs that have gone. Machine operators' employment is down about 50% from the mid-90s to now. And in the US in particular, you can see the hollowing out swoop jobs created at the bottom, the top, and not in the middle. That is not, by the way, true universally. And in the UK, I think that is a misdiagnosis of what's happened. I'll come back to that in a second on jobs. It's a USization. Now, so that's what's been happening, and you can see that happening in the future. You could imagine your driverless cars and others. So there's an issue going on. But, and here's why those book sales, I think, are overdone. One, the scale of the issue is overplayed, in my view. And that a lot of the Carl Frey and Osborne stuff on 47% of jobs sounds ludicrous. Personally, it is ludicrous. There's decent work in the OECD. Obviously, all these numbers are made up, but you can come to a 9% number quite easily as well. So I think the scale of the job threat is overdone, and history tells us anybody involved in technology will always overstate the impact of the technology they're working on. And that's what messiahs are for. So one thing on that. Right now, on the effects of it, employment's clearly at record highs, so it's destroying jobs. It could do doing a much better job at it. But much more importantly, if you look at the pay distribution today, and you compare it to the pay distribution in the 1990s, it is almost identical. So hollowing out of occupations has happened. That has taken place. You can see it, you can measure it. Hollowing out of the pay distribution has not happened, actually hardly at all. So whenever people say to you, all these middle-paying jobs have gone, and everyone's now in a very low-paid job, which, like my organisation does lots of work of low-paid jobs, so is our interest to say that's true? That is not true in the sense that the simplified hollowing out thesis is made. Now, why might that be happening? Partly because if you look at the UK in particular, we have been creating jobs at the top. There's a lot more managers and there's a lot more scientists in the UK today than there were in the mid-1990s. Secondly, some jobs that were at the top of the pay occupational distribution, teachers, there are a lot more of them, but they have moved, they are the new middle. So yes, there are less office clerks, yes, there are less machine operators, but there are a lot more teachers. They're relatively lower paid in relative status than they were in the 1990s, and they are the new middle. And so that is what has led that's why you've got a divergence between the occupational hollowing out and the pay distribution. So that might mean we should be careful about we need to be clear what we are worried about. If what we're worried about is living standards being driven by this, there's not a lot of evidence. If what we're worried about is human beings' lived experience of life, then we've got reasons to be concerned. Now look, in simple terms, what might some of that tell us about Keynes? One, he underestimates human need. So the essay is pretty clear. He thinks there are two kinds of human needs: subsistence needs, food, house, warmth, and then what he calls relative needs, by which he basically means status, relative status. Things you buy to have one up on your neighbours or to keep up with your neighbours. Those are two big areas of needs, but it turns out there are others that we have now see happening. It turns out rich people, for example, have a huge appetite for eating out, and they are not all doing that for status reasons. They just quite like it. Human needs are broader than his essay gives credit for, and that's one reason. Now, just the last few points. One, if we're going to angst about technology, I think we should be angsting about the impact on the quality of jobs and the nature of jobs as much as about the quantity, in fact, significantly more. And there are choices that firms, societies, and government makes about how technology is used to change the nature of work. You don't go look beyond an Amazon warehouse. I was seeing them this morning to see there are choices that people can make about what technology does. And then one last point, which is we haven't really touched on about the nature of the essay. I actually think in lots of ways, although it's treated as an economic essay, what we've really got is an upper middle class artistic hippies essay. That's what we've slightly got in this essay. What we've got is a value-based, personal values driving the economics, which is basically, he believes that the idle rich are a failure, and that the working poor don't have the talents to enjoy their leisure suitably yet, and that he doesn't phrase it like this because he's not an idiot, but the artistic upper middle class, he gets quite close to this, the artistic upper middle class, which does know how to use time properly, which is basically do art, is going to educate everybody else into using their time more effectively. Now, you might agree with him, which is fine, in which case work less and go and spend more time doing art. But obviously there's this thing called tastes and different views, and it turns out he's wrong about what people wanted to use their time for. And if you look at actually what that big gap in working hours is being used for, it turns out people have found things outside work to invest their life energy in. Actually, a lot of it turned out to be parenting. If there's what people are actually doing, they're doing a lot more parenting. They're very active, and they're doing some sport, and they're doing lots of other things. And it turns out, who would have thought there are choices in life? Sometimes people make different ones.
Thank you. Fantastic. Francis Coppola, you're probably spending your spare time doing economics, from what I can make out from your CV. And you're a writer and many other things.
And as somebody who made a career out of being an artistic
Yes,
hippie,
you are.
I really can sing. Well, my first profession is music, and I am really a singer. But in my spare time, as you say, I write about finance and economics and such things. It's kind of an interesting reversal of the way we normally think about things. So I have some sympathy for Keynes' point of view, I guess. But I thought I would start by quoting not Keynes, but another writer. This is just the end of his essay. It's the last couple of lines. It goes, "Modern methods of production have given us the possibility of ease and security for all. We have chosen instead to have overwork for some and starvation for others. Hitherto, we have continued to be as energetic as we were before there were machines. In this we have been foolish, but there is no reason to go on being foolish forever." That is from In Praise of Idleness by Bertrand Russell, which was written in 1932, so not long after Keynes' essay. So, you know, I'm looking backwards a little bit and saying, hey, we've been here before. And in fact, we've been here many times before, because of course a lot of the arguments at the moment about the nature of work and the hollowing out in the middle of, oh my God, we've got to have those jobs back, is essentially the Luddite argument from the 19th century. We have to slow down the progress of technological change because we can't lose these jobs. What on earth will people do? The Luddites were wrong then, and I think they're wrong now. So, looking ahead, I am sort of qualified disagreement with Keynes, because I think that what is happening is not the end of work, but the changing of work. I think we are seeing fundamental changes in the nature of work, and changes that we don't really understand, and in a way that's the nature of technological change, is that it's actually very difficult, or verging on impossible, for us to see what the jobs will be in the future that everybody will do. I am confident that those jobs will exist, we just don't know what they are. I may never find out what those jobs are, because I think that the next golden age of work in the current industrial revolution, as it were, is going to come after I am dead. In the meantime, we have quite a long period of instability and insecurity, and people who will lose traditional and forms of employment, forms of work that they thought were secure, replaced with something much more insecure, much more fluid, and in many ways culturally unacceptable to them. And I think the cultural implications here are almost harder to pick up than anything else. The unwillingness of blue-collar men, for example, in America, to do what they regard as pink-collar jobs. And yet, it may well be that that's where the jobs are in the future. We'll be caring for people rather than producing stuff. Because, hang on, robots can produce stuff a whole lot better than we can. There will continue to be jobs in manufacturing, and I suggest that they will be highly skilled. A lot of our imperative at the moment is to say, let's do something about education skills. Absolutely, bring it on. Education skills, that's great, but we still have to remember there are a lot of jobs out there that we regard as low skills, and I'm going to mention the care sector again, to say there are a lot of jobs out there that we regard as low skilled, anybody can do them, they don't need any education and attainment, and anybody with any gumption, any ability is going to train them to do something else, and they don't have to do that. And yet we want those jobs to be done well. We want increasingly our elderly, because we do have a demographic issue, cared for properly. And maybe it's time we grasp the nettle and say perhaps one of the changes that we're seeing in jobs is a move more towards caring than making. And that raises, the cultural issues that raises is, I think, to do with the historical tendency to regard caring jobs as being the province of women and something that we don't pay for. And that challenges all sorts of cultural beliefs about the roles of men and women, about what we regard as valuable, about even how we measure value. What do we mean by work? If work is something that is paid for, but you have something now that is regarded as incredibly valuable but you don't want to pay for, what does that say to you about your values? There are huge challenges here about work, the concept of work. What do we even mean by work? What do we value? If we are able to produce goods in such quantity that they become abundant, how do we value them? What is value? These are the kind of challenges that we face. And I think that sort of a narrow discussion about, oh, what's everybody going to do, kind of misses the wider point about the nature of value, the nature of work, the roles in society for particular groups, and looking ahead, the reordering of society. We are at the beginning of a revolution. I don't find this a particularly pleasant revolution at the moment. I'm hopeful that at some point in the future it will change for something a bit more pleasant, but I understand completely the fear that drives it. So I think we can look ahead and say, yeah, in the future people will still work, but what people will do will be very different from what they do now. And there will be things that now we may consider as being just something people do in their spare time. Then in the future, we will regard as work. Bring it on, I say.
Okay. Thank you. Before we throw it open to questions, just all of you mentioned technology, but if one looks at technology, what's interesting is the data shows jobs are being created all over the place. Globally, there's more people working in services, in the industry. I notice Martin Malone's in the audience, and he's just written that next year you're going to see falling unemployment rates in the States, across the Eurozone and in the UK. Many people say the big challenge with technology is that it's one of the key factors driving real wages down, along with the sort of old unions no longer there, financialisation, globalisation, technology. So is the impact of technology really going to be just driving real wages further and further down in the future?
I find it absolutely fascinating that Britain has a productivity problem. Britain has a really, really, really serious productivity problem. Productivity growth since 2008 has been abysmal. But this is not just a British problem, this is a global problem. In both advanced economies and in emerging economies, productivity growth has been slowing for 15 years at least. Not just 2008, 2004, 2003. We have a global productivity problem. And yet, rather than an actual real problem, we are talking about a potential opposite problem. Because, robots taking all of our jobs is a productivity surge. So, I think rather than thinking about those, why is wage growth weak globally? One reason wage growth is weak globally is because productivity growth is weak globally. That's the crucial problem facing Britain, the advanced economies, and emerging markets at the moment.
Okay, just in terms of policy, if you take the view that we are already in the new industrial revolution, Francis touched on that, and indeed Alan Mack on Tory MPs just recently, I've mentioned his work a few times, he's produced a really good report about the fourth industrial revolution and how the issue is how well placed can Britain be to actually benefit from that. Is that really the issue we should be talking about in terms of policy rather than where the jobs are going and the real wage? Is it a skills issue? What's the real, if you were to be put in front of the Prime Minister this afternoon and were asked to give one piece of policy advice that links all this together, what is the key issue that we in Britain should be really getting our teeth into?
That's a slightly different question. There's one thing, in front of the Prime Minister now, he said there's things you could definitely do that would definitely make Britain a better place. Then I'd say, why don't you go and build some houses, and why don't you sort out your skill system for your 50% of the population?
So it's skills.
So there are obvious, massive public policy things that we know could be done, which is the key difference. Now,
but linked to work and inflation. Okay.
Yeah, but non-living standards, those would make a big difference and don't need complicated economics. So there's not ambiguous, there just would be good things. Now, there's then a different question, which is, insofar as we're going to spend our time talking about robotics and the labour market, why don't we get out of a conversation about how scary it all is and into a conversation about how we maximise the benefits and spread those benefits as widely as possible, and that would be a significantly better use. It sounds like some MPs are already doing that, but that would be a much better use of all our...
So you're talking about splitting up the cake rather than growing the cake? Is that...
No, I'm saying there's things that we can do right now that would grow the cake and share the cake better. They've got nothing to do with technology. But then a separate issue, which is insofar as public policy is going to discuss technology, rather than us having lots of FT awards for books that say it's all really disastrous, and us discussing them at dinner parties, we'd be better off, we would be, I think, which you're getting at, better off discussing, as they are in Germany, how they make the best possible cake growing opportunity out of those technological changes. And that would be a really good use of all our time.
Francis?
I think public policy. Can I come back in a minute because I want to think run it over a bit because I formulate what
Yeah,
I've said.
just before I go to the floor then, Daniel, one question. Some people have said that in Keynes' time people were basically age 14 going out to work, they basically died as soon as they hit 65. If you look nowadays, people waste a lot of time in education. Some people work very hard in education. Some people have leisure time associated with education. People are living to be 80. So when you factor it out, we might well, over a lifespan, be down to much, much lower hours of work when you look at it. And people might actually be valuing leisure far more efficiently and effectively than you touched on.
In the sense that they're spending so much time...
Over their lifetime, when you factor in the fact that they are now not working from 14 to 65 and then dying, they're actually spending 10 more years in education and then they're living for another 15 years after they've died. Oh, sorry, after they stopped work. Before they've died. So
Now that we should do. That's a good technology.
are the figures actually far more conducive to what Keynes was touching on in the past?
Someone has done that.
Yeah, you're basically mean year adjusted average weeks
Yeah.
of working. That has been done, and obviously the number is significantly lower than 35 hours a week. Although I don't think it gets to 15.
Yeah.
But it gets, we're getting close.
I think it's. I mean, I think it's important not to be. What do I think the challenge that technology poses for the labour market in the 2020s? What you might be thinking about if you're a strategic policymaker. I don't think the story is one of mass unemployment. So, the rise of the robots idea is unhelpful for lots of reasons. But that's not just, if you are displaced from your work as a machinist, right, and you're told that here's the skills and capabilities that you need to move job, and you're 50, and the idea of learning these new skills and capabilities, within your working life, it's going to be a struggle for you. That starts to me to seem like really quite a significant problem. And so for me, the 2020s challenge is how do you give people the skills and capabilities to do the sorts of things that currently that only, I mean, even if you don't think that that robots are going to rise, the idea of responding in thinking about the way in which you educate people as if that might happen in the future is probably a good thing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Just a bit of if you look at what we've actually done as a country, obviously we've done the opposite. The state has removed itself from adult retraining over the last 10 years. I don't know, some people in the audience were involved in this, but some semi-intentionally, semi-unintentionally, so we're doing the opposite.
Okay. Audience, any comments?
Just one brief one. One of the reasons why
There's a microphone just coming through.
one of the reasons why we have to focus on making the best of new technologies is there's no way to resist it. State capacity was much less in the era of the Luddites, and there was no possibility for states to resist those technological changes. And even though state capacity is much greater now, I suspect there'll be no way, there's no alternative for us to make the best of it.
Okay. Just next.
Joe Grice, I was very struck by Duncan's observation, I think, that it's a slightly strange conversation to have about how jobs are all going to disappear. We've actually got record jobs, and we've had 10 years of quite unprecedented, possible 10 years where actually, so in a sense you could argue it's a shortage of goods rather than a shortage of jobs that we're immediately facing. That may change. But the thought I had, and sort of go back to Keynes, the national accounts have become a very dominant feature in economic thinking, economic debate, political debate as well. I think as the person said, Keynes sort of embraced national accounting after a year or two because it sort of gave a way of operationalising the general theory. But is that out of date? Should we be thinking about how we measure output, for example, how we measure new kinds of work and so on? And is that actually an activity which is worthwhile?
Okay. Actually, come on, you've written a couple of very good books on technology, and you can give a plug to one of them. Was it 9 to 5 or something?
Beyond 9 to 5.
Beyond 9 to 5. And I know you've written extensively on this, so why don't you tell us?
Well, I think one of the, if you like, problems is that we're assuming an industrial steady state going forward, where essentially we're doing a lot of process work. But I think we're seeing a kind of anthropological change in that prior to the industrial era, we were highly mobile, highly social, work and life were integrated, we made our own decisions, we were creative, and we were judged on our productivity. During the industrial era, we became horsepower, and in the latter parts of the industrial era, we started to become mobile again, we started to become social again, and so on. So we're starting to see a kind of change in the relationship between the talent and the factory owners, so to speak. And I think that's going to destabilise things quite a bit. And I do think that the next generation are looking at careers from a very different way to their parents. They're not seeing them as primarily economic vehicles, but a way of expressing themselves, finding out their true purpose, finding the limits of their human performance, and so on. So when the drivers as to why you turn up for work change, that's going to really change the economics and how we go about consuming. And young people in particular, and this may be a Lehman's effect, they've almost started to embrace a frugal capitalism, whereby low outgoings means that their incomings only have to be low, so they can choose work on the basis of what they feel passionate about, as opposed to what they need to, fulfill a lavish lifestyle.
Frugal capitalism. Yes, by default. Thank you for that, and thank you for the two questions. Francis, why don't we go down the line and everyone can make their concluding comments?
Okay. I kind of ducked the question earlier about public policy because I wanted to think about it a bit more, because so much of what I'm talking about kind of relates to this kind of reordering of society and questioning what we value and how we measure. And it seems to me that would take quite a long time and be quite painful. So public policy, I personally think we need to put some kind of stabiliser into the labour market, and for me that would be universal basic income. We can discuss that if you like, because I think that the labour market is going to become increasingly fluid and unstable, not least because it's very hard to make this kind of transition smoothly, and there are a lot of people who either will lose out or feel that they will. Your point about the 50-year-old man, as it stands, if he's been training at 50 from a skills job in routine manufacturing, he's going to be retraining for what is currently regarded as an unskilled job in care, which pays him half as much, because we have not sorted out yet what we value and what the real value of that work is to us. So in the meantime, I think we need to provide some kind of support to the labour market. And like I said, I would prefer that to take the form of universal basic income, so we don't have to get into arguments about papers and stuff. And the other thing I would suggest for public policy is that we push back against the natural tendency of those who are scared about the effects of things becoming abundant to create pockets of scarcity in order to keep prices up. I'm thinking particularly about housing here, since housing is a survival need, and if you can manage to keep the price of your housing high, you can keep people doing drudge jobs forever.
Okay, interesting. Torsten.
The last intervention is really interesting. On the, and I kind of half agree on the second order preferences of the youth. I disagree on the first order preferences and on what is actually happening in the labour market. So by which I mean, what is definitely true is that people saying things like, I'm going to actualise myself through my work is now not just in kind of Marxist textbooks, but it's also some youth will say. So I agree with that. And they kind of think that is the kind of new millennial, we're doing an intergenerational commission on kind of how different generations have changed. And there's definitely a bit of that around, particularly if you're in like a square mile of East London. Yeah, there's a bit of that around. So I'm not saying there's none of that around. And people definitely think they should think that, well, which I mean second order preference. Here's the problem. On the first order preferences, the weird thing is, for all this idea that the millennials are really entitled and they're all kind of doing things differently, you actually ask them what they want. They're incredibly boring people. Like, they want to own a home, have a steady job, and a stable income. they're not, and that's what they actually say. You ask them, that's what they say. And then if you say, right, well, that's just what they say, what about what's actually happening to them in the labour market? Actually, the little buggers are incredibly risk averse. They're like, job-to-job moves are horrendously low for this group, and that's one of the reasons why their pay is getting murdered, because you get a big pay rise. Your income pay goes up by like 10% if you move jobs in your 20s. If you don't move jobs, it goes up by 2%. Like, they need to move jobs, and they're not. They're regionally and geographically, they move a lot less. And that's all to do with people who've got degrees that are young now. People who didn't have degrees have never moved in general, except in huge movements in the 19th century. There's not some 20th century nirvana for geographical mobility. I would say we should be, and 10 years going up, not down as well. People are not changing jobs. So I would say, is it really as chop and changing as the youth would have us believe?
Daniel?
I think my closing comment, and it will be in line with public policy again, which is that I think there's a kind of legacy from the 20th century effect of technology on the labour market, which is that we think the kind of public policy intervention is just to kind of educate people and try and move them up the skills distribution to kind of, the solution to someone displaced is to try and retrain them for a high-skilled job. And one of the things I spent a lot of time doing and wrote a book on is trying to understand what technology is doing to the professions, doing to doctors and teachers, accountants and lawyers and so on. And I think one of the stories of the 21st century will be technology, it's kind of a paradox. So technology having a really big impact on that sort of work that we traditionally think is high-skilled, and actually struggling to erode some of the low-skilled work that we tend to think of as being. So one of the paradoxes that roboticists really are coming up against at the moment is called Moravec's paradox. It turns out that some of the most basic things we do with our hands and our senses are the most difficult to automate. And some of the things that you spend the first 15 years of your career doing as a junior lawyer now are very easy to automate. So I think that 20th century story that the solution to this is just going to be to give people more skills, I think is a mistake. And a kind of more nuanced view of what's happening in the labour market will show that I think it's going to be items of jobs and work in places that we might not have expected.
Yeah. And new jobs being created in these places. That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Duncan, last comment.
Yeah, very quickly then. Joel's comment on productivity, measurement of new technology, I think is interesting. We've not really discussed, and I perfectly buy that on my phone I have a lot of apps which I use regularly, which I'm not paying for. I have music and video services which I do pay for, but I spend a lot less than I used to on music, DVDs, etc. So I'm perfectly prepared to say I am reaping a large consumer surplus from my phone, from modern technology, and that's not market. It's not marketized. It shouldn't be in GDP as we measure GDP. So where does that leave you though? Well, I will buy the argument that my living standards are higher than they would be just conventionally measured. You've got to be careful how you do that. You don't want to say to people in their 20s, sorry about the big real wage cuts, but you do get Facebook. There has been a large income squeeze. I'm not saying that doesn't outdo that, but it does get you into the question, doesn't it? I will just finish with one point there, though. So I'm prepared to accept that living standards may be higher than conventionally measured, but you do need GDP as what it is. I mean, from a fiscal point of view, I suppose the government could say to me, actually, Mr. Weldon, we think your living standards are higher than they are conventionally, higher than as measured by your salary, because you're getting all of these things as a consumer surplus. Therefore, we're going to raise your taxes. Your actual pay hasn't gone up, but forget about that because you've got Facebook, and you're reaping a benefit from that. That would be a very, very brave decision by your government, I think, to do that. So we do need to keep
tax playing football as well.
Yes, exactly. So I think you need to measure. We need GDP as we currently have it, whilst also being aware of its limitations.
Thank you. Thank you, Duncan, Daniel, Torsten, and Francis. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We'll have a quick change round.